Rick Turner. As you can see by my outfit, I'm a volunteer in the park. I've been a volunteer since 2004. Let me give you a little bit of background. I'm retired Navy. I was a submariner, and now I'm going to talk to you about logging and steam locomotives. There's a connection between submarines and what I'm going to talk about. It's called steam. Steam makes our submarines go today. It's what made the locomotives go then. Anyway, so lumber companies in the Great Smoky Mountains in the park itself took out 2.2 billion board feet of lumber. Now, for those of you who don't know what a board foot is, that's a piece of wood that's 12 inches by 12 inches by 1 inch thick. And if we put them end to end, believe it or not, that will go around the world at the equator 16 times. That's a lot of wood. Now, there were 12 lumber companies that actually operated in the park. You can see over here Champion, and they were after pulpwood. They're a paper company, still in business today. But they were the biggest landholder. They had 90,000 or more acres in the park. Next is Little River. Now, Little River, of that 2.2 billion board feet, they're responsible for 560 million board feet. So maybe about a quarter of it came from the 80,000 acres that Little River Lumber Company owned. Now, over on the North Carolina side, these were really small companies. For instance, if we take a look over here at Norwood, when Mr. Norwood died, the company didn't know how to continue on, and so they decided that they were just going to fold and go out of business. And so they started taking all their equipment out of the mountains. And this is one of the pieces that well, it fell over, and they needed that to get it back up again. So they said, oh, well, we'll just leave it there. And so today, if you go up off of Kewohee, get the correct pronunciation, this is off the Forney Creek Trail via a manway. And you can find it, and it's big. What they did with that was a steam engine, not a locomotive, and what it was used for was to lower down loaded log cars and bring back empty log cars. Now, they had a little narrow gauge railroad that ran around up at the top, and they brought all the logs over, and they put them on the log cars and lowered them down with this little guy here. Now, prior to 1900, there was a certain amount of logging that was done, and it was done with splash dams. Now, the way a splash dam works is you get a lake of water behind the dam, you put the logs that you want to send down to the sawmill below the dam, and then if they have gates, you open up the gates, or sometimes they just blew them up. And then the water rushes through, it picks up the logs, and it heads on down the stream. Now, this is the sinks after a rather heavy rain. And just a heavy rain. Now, this area has had log jams in the past. And there was one that was really big that they needed dynamite to free it up. Now, believe it or not, the river used to flow this way. And it went around and came back in down below. And then they hit the dynamite, and it changed the course of the river, and that little oxbow just disappeared. So how did this work? Let's take a look.
Contributed to the eventual demise of the colorful river drive. Generally, logging was done along several tributaries of a larger stream, and the floating logs converged to form a massive flow.
Now, that ended up not being a really good way to do it, and I'll show you why. Y'all know where Metcalf Bottoms picnic ground is. Just below Metcalf Bottoms was a splash dam. The Tennessee River is right there past Rockford. So if they didn't catch all these logs, those logs would flow right into the Tennessee River, which is a navigable waterway. Not a good thing. So they said, you know, this doesn't really work out too well. Let's try something else. And so they turned to portable sawmills. And they were cutting down mostly poplar. And they were stacking the boards up, as you can see here in the picture. And then they would bring wagons in and they would take them out by wagon. And they found that this was a lot more efficient. Now, it's really hard to see how this works. Let me show you how this does work. This is a steam engine, very much like the one that fell over up at Kawohe. And the only thing that turns is this wheel here. If we want to move this, you notice that it's got a tongue here, and we can hook a tractor, or back then they would probably use oxen or horses to move it where they needed. And so the big wheel turns, and it's got a belt. At the other end of the belt is a small wheel. Now, so every time the big wheel turns once, that little wheel is going to turn a number of times. Then attached to the little wheel is the saw blade. Now, numerous tanneries were established in the Smokies, in the Appalachians, all around the Appalachians. And why was that? Well, the meatpacking companies in the Midwest had all these cowhides, and they knew, well, we can turn this into leather and make more money. Well, the only problem is we don't have any tan bark. Where's the tan bark? In the Appalachians. It comes from the chestnut tree, the oak tree, and the hemlock. So, a company by the name of the England and Walton Leather Company of Philadelphia came and established a tannery in the little town of Gamble's Store. Now, Mr. England and Mr. Walton did not like the word gamble. They just thought it had a bad connotation altogether. And they said, we have to rename this town. So they decided, let's see, England and Walton, Walton and England. Let's do this. Let's go wall and land, and we'll call it Walland. And that's how the town of Walland got its name. Now, they needed railroads. The railroads, they needed to bring the rawhides in, the finished good out. Now, they were thinking initially with this tannery that they would be able to float the tan bark down the Little River. Well, that didn't work out too well at all. So now they need a railroad to bring the tan bark in. So they turned to another guy from Pennsylvania, W.B. Townsend, Wilson Bailey Townsend, known as the Colonel. Now, he's from Pennsylvania, he's from the Lancaster area, and he has no military background, but he's still a colonel. Now, how did he get that? Well, he had some operations in Kentucky, and y'all have heard of the Kentucky Colonel, like Colonel Sanders? That's what we got here, Colonel Townsend, and he really liked that title, and that's why everybody called him Colonel. So he said, yes, I can bring your tan bark in for you, and you know what? I think I'm going to buy 80,000 acres of land with my business partners, and I'm going to do some logging while I get you the tan bark. So here we have an aerial view of the operations that took place in Walland. We have the tannery over here. We have the Knoxville and Augusta Railroad coming in from Maryville. And they stopped right there. And they said, if you need that railroad on the other side of the river, you're going to have to do it yourselves. Now, these are the guys from Pennsylvania. They only knew how to build covered bridges. And that's why we have a covered bridge going over the Little River. Now we have the Little River Railroad coming in here. So the way they work this is that the Knoxville and Augusta trains would come in and they would disconnect the locomotive and go over here to this turntable. The locomotive would turn around and head on back to Maryville. Meanwhile, a Little River Lumber Company locomotive would come in, turn around on the turntable, hook onto the cars, and continue on. So here we can see a Knoxville and Augusta locomotive with passenger trains coming in, Here's the depot, and here's the people waiting for the train. And all that's left of the tannery is this England and Walland and Company, 1930. On January 7th, 1931, the tannery burned down. So why didn't they rebuild it? Well, there's three reasons. Number one, the park is coming. They know it's coming. And that's going to dry up their source of tan bark. Number two, it's right in the Depression. Money is tight. And number three, if you've ever been around a tannery, it stinks. So those are the three reasons why they didn't do it. So we've got the railroads now, and we've got passenger cars, and now the railroads are going to bring people and jobs to this area. Now, most of the people that lived in this part of East Tennessee pretty much lived hand to mouth. In other words, they hunted for their meat, they farmed for their vegetables, and they just existed. There was very little employment, excuse me. Then the railroads come in, and anyone that wants a job can have it. So we go like from 0% employment to 100% employment, almost overnight. And so, how did they build the railroad? Well, they take a steam shovel, take it to the end of the tracks, tie it down, and start digging. And then, where did the material go? They're right along the river. There's no EPA to stop them. Just dump it in the river. So when they couldn't dig anymore with the steam shovel, then the workers would come in with their picks and shovels, and they'd dig more and dump it in the river. They'd lay more track, move the steam shovel, and go through the same iteration over and over again. So here we can see we've got the steam shovel sitting here, and we've got the newly laid track. Meanwhile, in Townsend, and Townsend has picked up its name. It used to be called Tang, which is not anything to do with the orange drink. But they've changed the name over to Townsend in honor of Colonel Townsend. We have our first locomotive to be part of the Little River Railroad. Now, behind the boxcars is the depot. This is the depot that was in Townsend. And here in the foreground, we got trucks and lumber, and they're building log cars. Behind that, they're building the first of 3 sawmills. Sawmill number 1, and that's what this one is, lasted until 1906 and it burned down. Sawmill number 2 came in and lasted until 1915 and it burned down. Now, why couldn't they put the fires out? Well, every time they had a fire, all the firefighting equipment had to come in by rail from Maryville. So you can see it's going to be pretty well engulfed before they get there to put the fire out. But sawmill number 3 lasted until 1941 when it was finally torn down because everything has already gone away. Okay, payday rolls around and you get your pay envelope. Is that U.S. currency? Oh, hell no. No. Your pay envelope has got these coins in it, and it says Townsend Mercantile. Where can I spend that stuff? What can I do? Well, this is the Townsend Mercantile, owned and operated by Colonel W.B. Townsend. W.B. Townsend had coal mining operations in Kentucky and maybe even Pennsylvania. And anybody remember the Tennessee Ernie Ford song, 16 Tons? St. Peter, don't call me because I can't go. I owe my soul to the company store. That's the company store right there. So the interesting thing about those coins, they called them Doogaloo. Now there was Doogaloo for Townsend, there was Doogaloo for Elkmont, and there was Doogaloo for Tremont. You could not spend the Doogaloo from another place anywhere else except where it was issued from. So coins that came for the Townsend could not be spent in Elkmont or Tremont. I don't know why. That's just the way it is. And here we see 105 sitting on the turntable in Walland. And the guys are sitting here for the picture. But guess what? They have to get off of the train, come over here and start pushing on this rod right here, because this is a manual turntable. And now you know why this is another reason why this is the only turntable in this part of East Tennessee. Now notice the White House in the background. If you were to go over to Walland today, this is where that White House was. This is the White House now that sits right along on US 321, and now you have a good idea where that turntable was. But the pride and joy of Little River Railroad was locomotive 110. It was built by the Baldwin Locomotive Company out of Philadelphia. It was called a Pacific, and it was called a Pacific because it had 4 wheels up front, 6 drive wheels, and then 2 wheels under the firebox. So it was basically a 4-6-2. That configuration is called a Pacific. This one was the smallest Pacific ever built for standard gauge railroads. Now you will notice up here in the window is a picture of a beautiful lady. This is Margaret Townsend, the first of Colonel Townsend's 3 wives. Now Margaret was instrumental in bringing Christmas to this part of East Tennessee. Nobody had ever had a Christmas tree before. Some people would, maybe a Christmas present might be an orange or something like that. She went around, and 110 and her rail car took her to wherever she needed to go, and she bought Christmas presents so that the children of every employee would get a Christmas present on Christmas Day. Now, unfortunately for Margaret, she died on New Year's Eve in 1923. They were having dinner, and she got up and announced, she said, "I have to go up and get ready." And she went upstairs, she lay down on her bed and died. And 110 was draped in black, and it was her funeral train taking her remains for burial